Good afternoon. License and registration. Now, this vehicle is flagged as stolen.
You know who I am, do you?
I don't care who you are. Hand over your ID right now or you're going to have a major problem on your hands.
What's your problem, huh? You see this? I'm the police captain. Your career is over.
You can't do this. I know my rights. The words, a mixture of disbelief and defiance, would later become the centerpiece of the official investigation, a desperate declaration made against the unyielding force of uniformed prejudice. But before they were spoken, before the flashing lights sliced through the quiet afternoon, there was only the tranquil hum of a perfectly tuned engine on a sun-drenched suburban street. This is the documented record of Case File Code 1099, Hidden Identity. On the afternoon of April 14th, at precisely 3:42 p.m., Officer Kyle Jensen of the 3rd Precinct initiated a traffic stop on Oak Ridge Drive, an enclave of manicured lawns and old money tranquility. His target was a meticulously restored 1996 Chevrolet Impala SS, a vessel of gleaming black steel and chrome. The driver was Captain David Cole, a man with 22 years of decorated service, an unblemished record, and, in a turn of profound irony, the sitting commander of the state's Internal Affairs Division. The entire incident, from its baseless inception to its catastrophic conclusion, was captured with irrefutable clarity by two sources: the officer's own body-worn camera, logged as file number BWC7911, and the wide-angle lens of a residential security system, its footage cataloged as CCTV Log 2B. These digital witnesses would provide the evidence for the most rapid termination for cause in the department's modern history, triggering a civil settlement that would ultimately cost taxpayers $500,000 and decimate Officer Jensen's financial future. What follows is the forensic breakdown of a professional collapse, a moment-by-moment analysis of how one officer's ingrained bias led to his own complete and quantifiable ruin. The story begins 10 minutes before the stop, with Captain Cole enjoying a rare moment of peace. He was not a commander in that moment, but simply a man driving home. The Impala was his sanctuary, the culmination of a 4-year restoration project he had undertaken himself. Every component, from the rebuilt LT1 V8 engine that rumbled with a deep, satisfying baritone, to the hand-stitched leather of the seats, was a testament to his patience and precision. The afternoon sun warmed the polished dashboard, and the scent of wax and old leather filled the cabin. He was driving at 20 miles per hour, 5 below the posted limit, his hands resting lightly on the wheel. His thoughts were mundane, civilian. He was contemplating the overgrown rose bushes in his front yard and making a mental note to call his sister for her birthday. This was his neighborhood. He had lived 2 blocks from this very spot for over a decade. He watched as a young family pushed a stroller along the sidewalk, waving as he passed. The world was orderly, calm, and predictable. This illusion of normalcy was shattered by the sudden appearance of a police cruiser in his rearview mirror. At first, it was just a distant shape, but it closed the distance with an unnerving speed. The omniscient record of the day shows that Officer Kyle Jensen had been patrolling the edge of his designated zone, a beat he considered a tedious assignment. At 26, Jensen carried a potent combination of insecurity and unearned authority. Departmental reviews noted his higher-than-average rate of stops in this affluent area, almost exclusively targeting vehicles driven by minorities. For him, the sight of the classic high-end Impala driven by a black man was not a curiosity, it was a provocation. The internal monologue captured by his body camera's ambient microphone would later reveal his mindset. He muttered that the car was probably stolen, a conclusion reached without a single shred of evidence. He began to tail the Impala. For 3 blocks, the cruiser stayed a fixed distance behind, a predator shadowing its prey. Captain Cole, a man whose instincts had been honed by 2 decades of law enforcement, was immediately aware of the tail. His posture did not change. His speed remained constant. He signaled a full 3 seconds before making a turn. He was performing a masterclass in lawful driving, systematically eliminating any possible justification for a stop. But justification was never part of Jensen's calculation. As Cole's home came into view just a block away, the world behind him erupted in a silent explosion of red and blue light. The serene afternoon was over. Captain Cole signaled, pulled the Impala smoothly to the curb, and placed the car in park. He watched in the mirror as Officer Jensen exited his vehicle, his movements stiff with aggression, his hand already resting on the butt of his holstered firearm. Cole took a calm, measured breath, knowing the man approaching his window was operating not on procedure, but on a prejudice so profound it had already sealed his fate. He reached for his wallet, unaware that the small black lens on the officer's chest was already recording the evidence that would utterly destroy a career. The body camera footage, logged as file number BWC7911, provides an unflinchingly clear perspective of Officer Jensen's initial approach. His steps are heavy, the sound of his boots on the asphalt amplified by the microphone. He bypasses the rear of the Impala, opting for a direct confrontational path to the driver's window, a tactical choice designed to maximize intimidation. His reflection is a distorted caricature in the polished chrome trim.
He leans in, his shadow falling across Captain Cole, a deliberate act of physical dominance. His first words are not a greeting or a professional statement of purpose, but a clipped, impatient demand. License and registration. Now. The word now is punctuated with a sharp rap of his knuckles on the glass. Before Cole can even comply, Jensen follows up with the question that lays his entire bias bare for the record. And you can start by telling me what you're doing in a neighborhood like this, with a car like this. This isn't the place to be cruising. The accusation is multifaceted, a baseless trinity of assumptions about race, class, and intent. The official review of the incident would later note that Jensen's tone was not inquisitive, but accusationary, framing Cole as an intruder by default. Captain Cole's response, by contrast, is a study in de-escalation. His movements are slow and deliberate. He doesn't look at Jensen with fear or anger, but with a calm, assessing gaze. His hands remain visible, one resting on the steering wheel, the other moving methodically toward the glove compartment. "Officer, I live 2 blocks from here," he states, his voice even and devoid of emotion. "Just driving home. My documents are right here." Then he makes the crucial procedural inquiry that Jensen has already failed to address. What was the infraction I committed? This question, simple and legally required, hangs in the air. It is a direct challenge not to Jensen's authority, but to the legitimacy of his actions. The body camera captures a flicker of irritation in Jensen's eyes. He had expected submission, perhaps a nervous explanation, not a calm, articulate man quoting protocol back at him. This composure seems to fuel his aggression rather than temper it. He completely ignores the offered documents, his focus remaining entirely on the man, not the procedure. The digital log from BWC7911 timestamps Jensen's response at 3:43:12 p.m. He scoffs, a short, derisive sound that the audio picks up with perfect clarity. A sarcastic laugh follows. The infraction is "you look suspicious. You don't fit in here." The statement is a cataclysmic professional error, an explicit admission that the stop is based on prejudice, not probable cause. The IA investigation would later cite this exact sentence as the primary grounds for immediate termination. Captain Cole's reaction is imperceptible to an untrained eye, but the high-definition footage reveals a subtle shift. He slowly retracts the hand holding his wallet, placing it back on his lap. He has made the attempt to comply with a lawful order, but the officer has now made it clear this is not a lawful interaction. Cole's posture remains relaxed, but his focus sharpens. He is no longer a citizen being pulled over. He is an observer cataloging violations. This unshakable calm is the one thing Jensen cannot process. His entire approach is predicated on a power imbalance that Cole refuses to acknowledge. Frustrated, Jensen escalates from verbal intimidation to a direct threat, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Now, before I lose my patience and pull you out of this car myself, do you know who you're talking to? Do you know who I am?" The question is pure hubris, the last resort of an officer whose authority is being challenged not by resistance, but by quiet competence. He believes his uniform and badge are an answer in themselves, a symbol of unquestionable power. He leans closer, his face just inches from the open window, trying to use his physical presence to force the reaction he craves. The camera records the tense silence that follows, a brief, charged moment where the pristine suburban afternoon holds its breath. Captain Cole does not answer immediately. He simply holds the officer's gaze, his expression unchanging. Officer Jensen had just asked the single most important question of his short and disastrous career. He was about to receive an answer that would methodically and completely dismantle his entire world. What would you do if you were in Captain Cole's position at this exact moment? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The question hung in the air, a monument to unearned arrogance captured in high-fidelity audio by the device on Jensen's own chest. "Do you know who I am?" Captain Cole's response was not the one Jensen expected. He didn't offer his name or rank. Instead, he gave the young officer one final, professionally courteous off-ramp from the disaster he was creating for himself. "I know you are a uniformed officer of this department," Cole stated, his voice a low, steady baritone that carried no hint of fear or insubordination.
and as such, you are required by Departmental Policy 301.4 to state the reason for a traffic stop upon initial contact. You have failed to do so. I am asking you one last time, officer, for the record, what was my infraction? This was not defiance, it was a procedural checkmate. Cole was using the department's own rulebook as a shield, and Jensen, blinded by his own prejudice, saw it as a direct attack on his authority. The body camera footage shows his jaw tightening, a flush of crimson creeping up his neck. To him, this calm, articulate man was not a citizen asserting his rights, but a suspect challenging his dominance. He saw the Impala not as a classic car, but as the spoils of some illicit activity. He saw the driver not as a resident, but as an invader.
His internal narrative, fueled by a career of unexamined biases, had already written the script, and he refused to deviate from it. He completely ignored the question. Instead, he took a deliberate step back from the window, his hand moving from his sidearm to the radio on his shoulder. This was the point of no return, the moment captured with damning clarity by two separate camera angles. The wide shot from the residential CCTV across the street shows a tableau of suburban tranquility violently interrupted by an officer manufacturing a crisis. The close-up from Jensen's body camera documents the lie as it is formed. He presses the transmit button. "Dispatch, this is 3 Adam 7. I have a non-compliant male, refusing to identify, in a possible stolen vehicle, requesting backup at my location, Oak Ridge and Elm." The series of falsehoods was breathtaking in its audacity. Cole had been nothing but compliant. He had offered his documents. He had asked for the reason for the stop. The vehicle, registered in his own name for the past 5 years, was not stolen. Jensen was not just escalating the situation. He was creating a fictitious event, a dangerous fiction that would now be a permanent part of the official record. He was gambling his entire career on the belief that his word, backed by a badge, would outweigh the truth. He was tragically unaware that the truth was being recorded in high-definition video, every syllable of his career-ending lie preserved for the inevitable review. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, calm and routine. 10-4, 3 Adam 7, backup is en route. The call was complete. The lie was locked. The cavalry was coming, not to a real emergency, but to the scene of a professional suicide. With the lie broadcast over the official channel, a palpable sense of triumph settled over Officer Jensen. He had successfully escalated the encounter beyond the driver's control, framing the narrative to his advantage. In his mind, the scenario was now simple: a proactive officer detaining a non-compliant individual in a high-value vehicle that didn't belong. The arrival of his backup would be the final act, cementing his authority and validating his professional instincts. He stood back from the Impala, crossing his arms in a posture of dismissive patience, the victor awaiting the spoils. He was entirely unprepared for what happened next. Inside the car, Captain Cole had remained perfectly still, a silent observer to the young officer's self-immolation. He had given Jensen multiple opportunities to de-escalate, to follow procedure, to simply do his job correctly. Each opportunity had been arrogantly discarded. Now, the time for professional courtesy was over. With a slow, fluid motion that conveyed absolute control, Cole reached into his jacket pocket. It was the same motion he had used to retrieve his wallet earlier, but this time it carried a different weight, a finality that seemed to draw the light from the afternoon. Jensen tensed, his mind racing through possibilities, none of which came close to the reality about to unfold. Cole did not produce a driver's license. He produced a black, polished leather credential case, flipping it open with a practiced thumb. The interior held the twin symbols of absolute departmental authority. On the left, a heavy, sun-catching gold shield identified his rank, Captain. On the right, secured behind a clear window, was his photographic ID. The man in the picture stared out with the same unshakable calm as the man holding the case. Below the photo, the printed words were a death sentence for Jensen's career. Name, David Cole. Assignment, Commander, Internal Affairs Division. Cole held the credentials up to the window, not with anger, but with the quiet finality of a scientist presenting irrefutable data. The omniscient lens of the body camera zoomed in, capturing the stark block lettering with damning clarity. The triumphant smirk on Jensen's face evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a sickly, pale canvas. His entire body went rigid, as if struck by a physical blow.
The world tilted on its axis. The man he had profiled, harassed, and lied about was not just a superior officer. He was the ultimate arbiter of police conduct, the one man in the entire state you did not want to cross. Cole's voice was low and even, yet it boomed in the sudden suffocating silence. You asked me a question, officer. You asked if I knew who you are. The truth is, I don't. But I know who I am. I'm Captain David Cole. I am the head of internal affairs. And this, he said, gesturing with a credential case to encompass the entire scene, this illegal stop, your false report to dispatch, and your conduct, which is all being recorded on your own body camera, is now the subject of a Class A internal investigation. My investigation. The words landed like hammer blows. Jensen's mind scrambled, trying to process the inversion of power. The man he saw as a criminal was his judge. The evidence he thought he was creating against Cole was in fact the incontrovertible proof of his own career-ending misconduct. He felt a sudden, desperate urge to turn off the body camera, a futile impulse he knew was impossible. The lie was locked. The video was stored. His professional life was over. He opened his mouth to say something, an apology, a denial, anything, but all that came out was a dry, croaking sound.
Just then, a new sound pierced the tranquil afternoon, growing steadily louder. It was the sound of an approaching siren, the very backup he had called, now racing not to his aid, but to bear witness to his spectacular, self-inflicted ruin. If you believe Captain Cole's composure was key to resolving this situation, hit the like button. The siren's wail, a sound Jensen had summoned as a tool of intimidation, now served as the soundtrack to his own undoing. It grew from a distant cry to an immediate, piercing shriek before cutting off abruptly. A second patrol car, identical to his own, slid to a halt about 20 feet behind the Impala. The dashcam footage from this second vehicle, logged as Unit 415, provides a wide, sterile view of the scene. One officer standing frozen, a classic car parked perfectly at the curb, and the serene, sun-dappled backdrop of Oak Ridge Drive. The officer who emerged was Sergeant Frank Miller, a 20-year veteran with graying temples and a weary but discerning gaze. His movements were economical, honed by thousands of similar calls. He exited his vehicle with the practiced ease of a man who believed he was arriving to support a subordinate in a routine, if slightly escalated, traffic stop. His initial approach was standard procedure. He scanned the area, his eyes taking in the quiet houses, the lack of any visible threat, and then settling on his junior officer. What he saw immediately registered as wrong. Jensen wasn't in a position of control. He wasn't observing the driver or maintaining a tactical stance. He was standing stiffly, his arms locked at his sides, his face a ghostly shade of white that stood in stark contrast to his dark uniform. He looked like a man who had just witnessed a fatal accident, not a cop handling a non-compliant driver. Miller's gaze shifted from the paralyzed officer to the man inside the Impala. He saw a black man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed, sitting calmly behind the wheel. The man met his eyes not with the defiance of a suspect, but with the steady, appraising look of a peer. A flicker of recognition sparked in Miller's mind, a vague familiarity he couldn't immediately place. He continued his approach, his boots crunching softly on the asphalt. As he drew closer, the vague familiarity sharpened into a jolt of absolute certainty. The face in the driver's seat wasn't just familiar, it was a face from the department's command staff portraits that hung in the main precinct hall, a face from mandatory annual briefings on professional standards. The man was Captain David Cole, and not just any captain, he was the commander of the Internal Affairs Division. The realization slammed into Sergeant Miller with the force of a physical impact. His stride faltered for a half step. The entire context of the scene inverted. This was not a traffic stop, it was a career catastrophe in progress. His posture instantly transformed from casual readiness to rigid, formal attention. He bypassed Jensen completely, his focus entirely on the man in the car, his voice a mixture of shock and profound deference. "Captain Cole, sir, is there a problem here?" The words, captured with perfect clarity on both active body cameras, were the official validation of Jensen's monumental error. They were not for Jensen's benefit, they were a plea for information from a superior officer. For Jensen, hearing his direct supervisor address his target with such reverence was the final, crushing blow. The universe he had constructed, where his badge made him the ultimate authority on this street, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Captain Cole did not immediately answer. He held Sergeant Miller's gaze for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement of the sergeant's correct assessment of the hierarchy. Then he turned his head slightly, just enough to fix his eyes on the still frozen Officer Jensen. His voice, when it came, was stripped of all emotion, carrying only the weight of cold, irrefutable fact.
It was the voice he used when reading official charges in a termination hearing. "Sergeant," he began, his tone resonating with an authority that dwarfed Miller's own. "Officer Jensen initiated an illegal traffic stop without probable cause. He failed to state an infraction when asked, citing only that I looked suspicious and didn't fit in the neighborhood. He then knowingly filed a false report over a recorded channel, claiming I was non-compliant and operating a stolen vehicle. Every statement was a perfectly articulated charge, a verbal nail being hammered into the coffin of Jensen's career. The entire incident," he concluded, "has been recorded by his own body-worn camera, as well as the camera on your vehicle and a residential security system across the street. We have a complete record." Sergeant Miller absorbed the information, his expression hardening from shock into a grim professional resolve. He understood the cascade of consequences that was about to be unleashed. The audio log from his own body camera captures a sharp, frustrated exhalation of breath. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Jensen. The look was not of pity or collegial support, but of pure, unadulterated contempt for a fool who had just brought disgrace upon their precinct. Miller took 2 deliberate steps toward Jensen, closing the distance until he was standing directly in front of him. His first command was not a request. "Jensen, your firearm. Now."
The order was quiet, yet it cut through the air with the finality of a judge's gavel. Jensen flinched as if he'd been slapped. His hands, clumsy and trembling, moved to his holster. He fumbled with the retention strap, his fingers refusing to obey. After a few agonizing seconds, he managed to draw the weapon, holding it out to Miller in a gesture of total surrender. Miller took the firearm and secured it before delivering the next set of orders, his voice a low, unforgetting growl. "You are hereby relieved of duty, pending a full investigation. Place your badge and ID on the hood of your vehicle. You will wait here for a transport unit. You will not operate your vehicle. You will not speak to anyone. Is that understood?" Jensen could only manage a weak, pathetic nod, his eyes wide with terror. In the span of less than 5 minutes, on a sunlit street in front of the man he had racially profiled, Kyle Jensen had been publicly disarmed, stripped of his authority, and effectively erased from the police force. Captain Cole watched the entire exchange without a change in expression, a silent arbiter observing the inevitable conclusion of a process set in motion by one man's prejudice. He gave a single curt nod to Sergeant Miller, a signal that justice, in its initial form, had been served. The low rumble of the Impala's V8 engine was the only sound as he put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving Jensen to stand alone on the asphalt, a man whose entire world had just been dismantled by the very system he thought he controlled. The fallout for Kyle Jensen was not a slow decline, but a sudden, catastrophic collapse, an administrative and financial implosion executed with the surgical precision that only irrefutable video evidence can provide. The official Internal Affairs investigation, case file IA2024-048, was opened and closed in a record 72 hours. Captain Cole, adhering to protocol, formally recused himself from overseeing the final judgment, but the architecture of the investigation he had set in motion was flawless. The evidence compiled was overwhelming: the primary body camera footage from file number BWC7911, the corroborating dashcam video from Sergeant Miller's Unit 415, and the wide-angle impartial view from the residential security system, CCTV Log 2B. Together, they formed a digital trinity of truth that left no room for dispute, negotiation, or denial. Jensen's termination hearing was a sterile, perfunctory affair. It was not a trial, but a sentencing. He sat in a small, windowless room across from the chief of police and a representative from Human Resources. The footage was played on a large monitor, and the audio of his own voice filled the silence, the condescension, the baseless accusation, the sarcastic laugh, and the career-ending lie to dispatch. There were no character witnesses to call, no union representative willing to defend an officer whose actions violated not just departmental policy, but basic civil rights under the color of law. The termination was for cause, citing a litany of violations including gross misconduct, filing a false official report, and a violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, the deprivation of rights under color of law. The professional consequences were absolute. His career in law enforcement was over. His annual salary of $65,000 ceased immediately. More devastating was the forfeiture of his entire pension and benefits package, a future he had taken for granted, which actuarial tables estimated to be worth over $1.5 million over the course of his expected lifetime. His name was submitted to the National Decertification Index, a permanent public database that would prevent him from ever being hired by any law enforcement or licensed private security firm in the United States. He was, in a single afternoon, rendered professionally radioactive.
But the professional ruin was only the beginning. The financial devastation followed with the same brutal efficiency. The city's legal department, facing an indefensible lawsuit from a plaintiff who was not only blameless, but also the head of the state's internal affairs division, moved to settle immediately. The agreed-upon sum was $500,000, a figure calculated to avoid the even greater public relations disaster of a courtroom spectacle. Captain Cole accepted the settlement on one condition. The entire $500,000 amount was to be publicly donated to the Innocence Project, a nonprofit that works to exonerate the wrongly convicted. The gesture transformed the penalty from a simple payout into a public rebuke of the very prejudice Jensen had displayed. For Jensen himself, the financial blows were personal and ruinous. The Police Benevolent Association, in a rare public statement, declined to provide him with legal counsel, citing the incontrovertible nature of the video evidence and the severity of his misconduct. He was forced to hire a private attorney, accumulating legal fees that quickly surpassed $45,000. To cover this debt, he was forced to sell the Ford F-150 truck he often bragged about in the precinct locker room. Within 6 months, unable to find stable employment and buried under a mountain of debt, he defaulted on his mortgage. The house in the suburbs, the symbol of the life he thought he was protecting from outsiders like Captain Cole, was foreclosed upon.
His ruin was quantifiable, a line-item ledger of loss directly attributable to a single, prejudiced decision. While Jensen's world unraveled, Captain Cole's life remained a monument to professional composure. The incident on Oak Ridge Drive became a footnote in his distinguished career, a closed case file among hundreds of others. He continued his work as Commander of Internal Affairs, his reputation for fairness and integrity only enhanced. The footage from Jensen's body camera was repurposed, anonymized, and integrated into the Academy's training curriculum for new recruits, becoming a powerful case study on implicit bias and the devastating legal consequences of pretextual stops. Kyle Jensen's failure was thus transformed into a tool to build better officers, his career-ending mistake serving a purpose he could never have imagined. His name became a cautionary tale, a verb whispered in the Academy hallways: "Don't pull a Jensen." The final documented record shows Kyle Jensen working a series of low-wage, transient jobs, his identity stripped of the authority he once wielded so carelessly. The man who demanded to be known, who asked with such arrogance, "Do you know who I am?" had become a nobody, his future erased by a past he created in less than 5 minutes. Was the lesson learned? Did he ever truly comprehend that the man in the Impala represented not a threat to his neighborhood, but a standard of excellence he could never hope to achieve? One can only wonder if, in the quiet moments of his new, diminished life, he finally understood that prejudice always has a price, a debt that karma collects with unflinching interest, down to the very last cent. Have you ever witnessed or heard of a situation where someone's prejudice led to their own downfall? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to share this case file with someone who needs to see justice served.